Hi everyone, I'm going to make a quick video talking about how to write your formal report and how to use all of the resources on Canvas to do that. So I'm going to share my screen with the experiment modules open. So I'm going to open up the formal report page here. And if you can see at the top of my page already, I have all of these links already pre-opened. So on here, I have a formal report information page and rubric. So that's what we're going to spend the most time going over. And then this is a template to use, and then a link here with the same thing. I'll explain that. A reference guide. So this is how to write your citations or your references, and then some samples. So one from the American Chemical Society, and then 3 from some past students. So this first one, this information page, is probably going to be the most useful. Let's see, let's zoom in a little here. So at the top, it's telling you that you should be using this for content. And then the rubric should serve as your checklist. And then the template is for the formatting. So those are your 3 most important things. This is your content list. This rubric is going to be your checklist of everything combined. And then the template, which we will get to, is how to format it. So for the content, we're following a lot of the same things we've been doing with the abstract, meaning we want to stay in past tense and third person. Don't start a sentence with a number. If you are writing numbers, make sure that you have a space in between your number and your unit. We don't have a whole lot of numbers with this lab, but you do have some times, so seconds or minutes, so you'd want to have a space in between those. And then if it's less than 1, you want to have a 0 in front of that decimal place. So these are the same things we've been looking at. The first the first bullet point says that you want to use the template for formatting. There's a lot of different fonts and sizes, and it's done in columns. So we'll see that when we look at the template, but don't try and do it on your own. Make sure you're using that template. Okay, content. First thing, you need a title, you need your name, and you need your address. Now, the address might seem a little bit weird, but we are following the rules for writing this as if we were writing a research paper that's going to get published in a journal. And whenever that's done, the researchers need to say where they did the research. So generally that means what university they're working at. So you're not going to put your home address, you're going to put the school's address. And then you did work with a partner for this lab, so we need to give your partner credit. So you're going to include your partner's name, but because you're writing this paper, you're going to put a little star, a little asterisk next to your name to say that you are the main author of this paper. Next thing is your abstract. So pretty much the same rules as what we've been doing. Purpose, procedure, results. Specifically in the results, you want to talk about what was the most reactive in part A and part B, or in SN2 and SN1. And then the rest of the sections, you want to include a heading, a bold heading, just to make sure it's visible for each of these sections. So we have an introduction, experimental, results, discussion, and conclusion. You can almost think of this like we're taking the parts of the abstract and turning them each into their own section. So the abstract should technically be written last because it's a short summary of the rest of the paper. The introduction, you're going to say, why did we do the reaction? Why did we do the experiment? So what was your goal? It should include the actual reaction itself and the mechanism. So 2 generic reactions and the mechanism. So one for part A, one for part B, and then talking about it a little bit. Nucleophilic attack, loss of a leaving group, describe what's happening. And then the last thing is we always want to connect it to something bigger than us. So connect it to something outside of our class. Now, this could be anything from looking up who figured out SN2 versus SN1, so giving a little bit of history. It could be how an SN1 reaction is being used to make a new drug. Just connect it to something bigger than us. The experimental section is the procedure. So you're rewriting the procedure. Again, it needs to be past tense and third person, but you're writing the procedure, and you're writing it for somebody that knows chemistry but has never done this lab. So you don't need to explain what a test tube is, but you do need to tell them which chemicals to use, when to use them, all of that. And then include any hazardous warnings and your waste disposal instructions. The results, these are going to be tables. So you're going to have a table for part A and a table for part B. And in that, for each substrate, how much time it took the precipitate to form, and then that qualitative description. And this would be at room temperature and after heating, or whatever applies to each one. Not all of them needed to be heated, as we know. So you would just have results for room temperature for those, and then the ones that need to be heated at room temperature, it would say no reaction or no result, and then the results after heating. So you're not analyzing the data, you're just listing the data. And then the discussion section is going to be the bigger one. This is going to be where you have all of your explanations. So you're analyzing the results. So for the SN1 reactions, you're going to say which substrate was the most reactive and which one was the least. And so we can base this on time. Whichever one reacted the fastest would be the most reactive. And if you had two that reacted instantaneously, then whichever one made more precipitate would be the most reactive. And then least reactive, again, this would be no reaction even after heating it. And then we want to make some generalizations. So we want to look at leaving groups. So what was a better leaving group, chlorine or bromine? What was a better substrate type, primary versus secondary versus tertiary? And then we want to compare this to what we've talked about in lecture. Now, I know we haven't covered SN1 yet, but we will cover that right after spring break, and you can always read ahead or watch the YouTube videos to get ahead. But for SN1, we would expect tertiary to react really fast and primary to react very slow or not at all. So does that match what happened for yours? And then you're going to do the exact same thing for the SN2 reactions. Convince the reader about your results. So you can't just say this one was the fast or this one was the most reactive. You have to say why you're saying that. So it was the most reactive because it formed a large amount of precipitate the fastest. Do you think your data was good or bad? So pretty much, do you think the experiment went well? Or do you think that maybe something was sloppy or something was rushed or your hot water bath was hotter or colder than it should have been? And then the last one, were there any errors and how could you improve those errors for next time? The conclusion is only 2 sentences. The first sentence is the goal. And then the second sentence is whether or not you reached the goal. So for this one, the goal was to compare those SN1 and SN2 using all these different substrates. And then the goal, you could, again, if we go back up to this abstract, when we're talking about the results for most reactive, that can be what you restate in your conclusion. Your abstract should feel repetitive because it's a summary of everything else you talked about. So it's okay if you have things listed in your abstract and then again in another part of your paper. In terms of what order to write them in, your experimental could be written at any point. You could write that today. And then same thing with your results. Now that you have your results, you could write those at any point. I would write the introduction next, and then the discussion. And then last would be the conclusion, followed by the abstract. It's not how you have to write it, but this is a common way to do it because it's really the flow of information. Last, you need a reference section, and you should have 4 references. So your textbook, your Klein textbook and your lab textbook definitely count. So you can use your Klein textbook to reference the actual reactions, the SN1 and SN2. You could use your lab textbook to reference the procedure. You didn't come up with the procedure, so you have to reference it. For the hazardous warnings, you could reference whatever website those came from. And then up here in the introduction, where you have to find something related to chemistry or society, that could be your 4th one. So getting to 4 references isn't a stretch because we have to get information from so many locations. When you reference these, we I know when you're in other classes, a lot of times we use APA formatting. Maybe you have used MLA. Of course, we don't use either one of those in chemistry. We use our own. It's American Chemical Society. I'll show you how to do that on a later tab. And then you do need to use in-text citation. So I haven't opened that. We'll add him in there. And then down here is telling you that when you have either a picture or a table, it needs to be labeled. So for pictures, you're going to label it with a number and a caption, like figure 1, substitution mechanism. And then for tables, same thing. So table 1, SN1 reaction results. The first bullet point tells you that when you are drawing the reactions, you need to use a drawing program. So I do have these linked on Canvas. Let's go look at those now. So if I go back to our modules and I go to this right here, so in the very first one, this useful links one, and I scroll to the very bottom, down here I have 4 links to 4 different free drawing softwares. I use Marvin Sketch. This is what I use to make all of our exams. The other 3 are also good. Not all of them let you copy and paste though, so you might have to do screenshots and then crop it down. Marvin Sketch does let you do screenshots, and it works good for all types of tablets, laptops. So that would be my pick. I don't have as much experience with the other ones, but from what I have heard, they all are great. Okay, so I think we've covered everything here. I'm going to move over to the template, and then we'll look at the rubric. So for the template, the first page is just information, so we can delete that and ignore that. Here's the actual template. So this first spot is for you to, oops, that was too much highlighting. This first spot is for you to put in the title, and then the author's names, and then it has a spot for the abstract, and then the rest, it has like information in here, but really we're just gonna highlight this and then start typing in our own information. And so notice that it's in columns, it's justified, which means that we get this nice straight line on the left and the right sides of each column. So it's not left, it's not right, it's not centered, it's justified. And then it does have some sections down here for references, but we're obviously going to put in all of our own sections as well. So this template is on here, and this is a Word document. If you are using a Mac, let me go back here. This link right here will take you to the ACS website, and down at the bottom it has a Microsoft Word for Macintosh. So this might be the one you need to use. And then this one here, the one for Windows, is the one that I have on Canvas. So we're going to get rid of him. We've talked about that. Let's look at the rubric. So the rubric is the info page and the template combined. So your formal report is out of 65 points, and then this is a breakdown. So this helps both of us. It helps me grade your report and be very consistent with grading, but it also gives you a very clear idea of where all of the points are coming from. The general items at the top are just kind of general rules for past tense, following that template, putting in your name, all of that stuff. And then the rest of it are the details for each of the sections and what needs to be included. So that's coming from that info page, along with general things like grammar and spelling, the quality of it, the accuracy of it. So you can use this as a nice checklist because it includes the information from that information page and from that template. And then down here we do have the references, the minimum of 4, those in-text citations. I mentioned it, I haven't shown it yet, though, so I'm getting there. And then that they need to be in ACS style. So let's look at those now. So we did the template. So here, this is this link right here that says ACS reference guide. that is this guy. So this comes from a bigger book. This is the shorter version that we need to use. And it shows you how to cite your references using an American Chemical Society guide. And it has everything from a book, which, if you're using your Klein or your Pavia textbook, that's where you're going to use. But of course, the one that we'll probably use even more, if we scroll down, we have the section on how to cite a website. So you would have the author of the website. And so for this example, that's an entire chemistry department, which is completely okay. It might be a company, it might be a government, a branch of the government. And then you have the actual URL and then the date that you accessed it. Of course, we want to use reputable websites. So if it's a .edu or a .gov, that generally means that it's a decent website to use. If you have a question about whether something's a good website or not, you can always ask me. And then for the in-text citations, so again, this is another ACS guideline, but we have 3 different ways you can do it. All of them are correct. You just got to pick one and stick to it. For the superscript numbers, you're just putting a number at the end of the sentence as a superscript. And so this one is a 1. And so then that means that that is referencing reference 1 at the end of your paper. The parenthetical numbering is kind of the same idea, but you're putting the number in parentheses instead. And then the author name and year, at the end of the sentence, you're putting the author's last name and then the year. For us, because we're probably going to be using more websites than anything, I would suggest using one of the numbered versions. My lights turned off on me. This version down here is used more often if you're going to be referencing a lot of journal articles. So they have very clear authors. For us, that's probably not the case. But again, you can pick any of these 3 and just stick with it, be consistent with it. Okay, so I'm gonna get rid of these 2. And then the last thing that's on our formal report page is a ACS journal article example and some student examples. So the ACS one, this is from the Journal of Infectious Diseases. So this was a COVID research article. So we have the title, we have all of the authors, and notice they all have lots of little symbols after their names because they worked at a lot of different colleges. So we have all of their different locations. We have an abstract, and then it goes right into their paper. They have some pictures, some figures, and then underneath it, they have the figure number with a title. Definitely a much longer title than what we need. But notice it's okay if the pictures cover the whole page. It is also okay though, looking to see if they have one, like this one here, where it's within the column. So both of those are okay. If it's going across the whole page, it does take a little bit more formatting to fix, but either one's fine. And then let me go back to their table. When they have a table, the title is above it. So table 1 and then the title. But when we have a figure, the number and the title are below it. I don't know why, it's just how it's done. But so this kind of gives you an idea of an official one. And then the other 3, like I mentioned, are some past students. So some of these are a little bit older. They're, students that I had in Fresno. So this is, from 2017. But they're in here because they were very good examples. On the official one, it did have that logo at the top. So some students will include, our school's logo or the American Chemical Society logo, or if you want to make one up. Also, if you don't put one, completely fine. But so this student has their abstract, they have their mechanism over here, and then it's going through. Now, over the years, I do change the requirements slightly. So this student has a list of all of the chemicals and supplies that were needed. I don't require that anymore. So you might see that in some of these, but just know that follow our requirements. These students might have had slightly different requirements. And then let's see, who's our second student? Nathan, this one's definitely much more recent. And then we have kind of the same idea though. So we have that abstract, we have the introduction with the reaction, we have the mechanism, and then the rest of those sections. And then the last one, oh, this is from Stephanie. So this one's a little bit older as well. But again, it's showing you that same information, that same formatting, good, clean examples for their information. We have all of their references in there. So hopefully this will get you a good starting point and get you going on that formal report. If you want to have me read over a rough draft, I would be more than happy to. Um, and then, like I said, we won't talk about SN1 until after spring break, but if you wanted to get a head start on some of those sections that don't require any SN1 or SN2 knowledge, you could definitely do that. And then if you wanted to read ahead in the book or watch the lecture videos, you can always do that and get started on those other sections. But as always, text me, email me if you have any questions, and good luck.